Okay, let's dive right into this fascinating explainer covering Denzel Kenobi's profound essay, The Unfolding Mind. So, have you ever actually stopped to wonder where true understanding comes from? Like, does it really just come from a textbook or a crowded lecture hall, or is it found somewhere else entirely? Today, we are exploring a really powerful concept about how the human mind actually grasps and internalizes information.
The core theme we're unpacking today is what they teach versus what you figure out. We're going to look at some compelling historical and spiritual evidence that shows how real knowledge is actually forged through deep personal labor. It's not something you just passively receive sitting in a classroom. As the author points out, he learned this firsthand in places where the syllabus was literally adversity and the tuition was paid in years. The central thesis here is beautifully simple. It is not about what they teach you, it's about what you figure out. And look, this isn't just some edgy, modern, anti-schooling hot take. When the author went back to ancient texts to test this idea, he found it's actually one of the oldest arguments on record. The ancient psalmist claimed to surpass his teachers, not because he somehow found better teachers, but because he meditated. He took the information that was handed to him, and he worked those concepts over in his own mind until they truly, fully became his own. Let's move into Section 1, the labor of figuring out, and Section 2, the wilderness curriculum. So, our source traces this concept all the way back to ancient Israel's 40-year wandering, and the text reveals a really fascinating educational purpose here. That wandering wasn't just some punishment tacked on to an education. The wilderness literally was the education itself. Think about the daily falling of manna, which famously couldn't be hoarded. It was designed so that the lesson, that man doesn't live on bread alone, had to be learned by actually living it out day after day. Modern educators actually have a specific term for this, the cycle of doing, reflecting, concluding, and trying again. They call it experiential learning, where the learner actively constructs knowledge. But honestly, this method is as old as the Exodus. The literal instruction might have been given at Mount Sinai, but the actual understanding was forged right there in the sand. Which brings us to the really fascinating concept of tacit knowledge. This is a whole category of knowledge that literally cannot be written down in a book. It's that instinctive judgment in a craftsman's fingers or the perfect sense of timing in a farmer's bones. In Scripture, the very first person described as being filled with the Spirit wasn't a prophet or a priest, but a craftsman named Bezalel. He was granted this incredible wisdom and understanding of the hands, not of the lecture hall. And this brilliantly illustrates a massive contrast that even ancient academics had to concede. Take Ben Sira, an academic from the 2nd century before the Messiah. He noted that the scribe has all the leisure time in the world to sit around, study, and interpret things, but Ben Sira had to admit that without the plowman, the smith, and the potter, no city can even stand. The scribe merely interprets the world, right? But it's the hands-on craftsman who actually holds the whole shebang together. All right, moving to Section 3, wisdom without credentials. Second Temple tradition portrays Abram as basically the original autodidact, a completely self-taught thinker. Tradition holds that he grew up surrounded by idolatry with literally no one to instruct him in the truth. So what did he do? He reasoned his way to understanding just by observing the stars. He realized they were just servants, not the ultimate powers. This is such a perfect model of the idea that true wisdom is breathed into a laboring, questioning mind. It's not just handed down by a credentialed elite. This whole scandal of the uncredentialed really culminated with Yahusha and his disciples. The formal scholars of Jerusalem were completely baffled by them. They were literally asking, "How knowest this man letters, having never learned?" Because, you see, they lacked those formal credentials from the established schools of the day. Later on, the council realized Peter and John were unlearned and ignorant men, yet they completely marveled at their wisdom. Why? Because their credential was proximity and apprenticeship. They walked right beside their teacher for 3 years, failing, trying again, and figuring it out. Which leads us to Section 4, the crime of the alphabet. Looking back, history is full of incredibly stark legislation. In 1740, the South Carolina Negro Act slapped heavy fines on anyone teaching an enslaved person to write. After the 1831 Nat Turner Rebellion, states like Virginia and North Carolina clamped down even harder with strict anti-literacy statutes. The author of our source points out a really profound historical truth here. These brutal slave codes were actually a sworn confession by the regime. They weren't outlawing something harmless. They knew perfectly well that a mind which learns to read will eventually figure out its way to freedom. Frederick Douglass realized this firsthand. when his enslaver strictly forbade his wife from teaching Douglas his letters, warning her that it would unfit him to be a slave, Douglas instantly understood that this was the pathway to freedom. The instruction was withdrawn, and the withdrawal itself became the lesson. It's amazing. The most formidable American mind of the 19th century was built in direct defiance of a curriculum designed specifically to prevent its existence. He just figured it out anyway. Or take the absolutely unbelievable achievements of Benjamin Banneker. Born free in Maryland, he was a completely self-taught man. He taught himself complex math and astronomy. He borrowed instruments, assisted in the 1791 Federal Survey, published widely read almanacs, and even directly confronted Thomas Jefferson in writing over the glaring contradictions of slaveholding liberty. I mean, look at this list. This is an overwhelming volume of output from a man whose society fully expected to remain unlearned, but who labored tirelessly to figure it out for himself. Let's look at Section 5, Tools versus the Fire.
Now, looking at all this historical evidence, you might be wondering, does this mean we should just despise formal education? Absolutely not. As our explainer carefully notes, this argument is not against learning or against having teachers. Scripture definitely honors formal learning. Moses spent 40 years in Pharaoh's elite academy. Daniel excelled in 3 intense years of Chaldean instruction. Paul sat right at the feet of Gamaliel, literally the most credentialed teacher of his entire generation. But here's the catch. In every single one of those cases, their decisive, world-changing understanding happened somewhere else. It happened in the wilderness, or in the heart that purposes.
So the crucial point to take away is this. Formal instruction simply supplies the tools. It gives you the languages, the letters, the raw material, and entry into rooms that would otherwise be closed to you. But figuring it out, that is the fire. A student who merely receives information is just a vessel. But a student who interrogates, tests, and meditates on that information, that person becomes a true craftsman of their own understanding. The instruction is just the raw material. Figuring it out is the fire that actually turns it into understanding. And that brings us to Section 6, the unfolding mind. This brings everything together into what actually happens inside you when your mind truly wrestles with information. The essay takes its title from Psalm 119, verse 130, which says, "The entrance of thy words giveth light." The Hebrew word used for entrance here is petach, and it literally means an opening or an unfolding, kind of like unrolling a scroll. Notice what it doesn't say. It doesn't say that the mere possession of words gives light, or that sitting in a lecture hall automatically gives light. The light comes at the unfolding, that precise moment the word opens up under the immense pressure of your own meditation and labor. And that cannot be conferred by a piece of paper or a diploma. And this beautifully captures the ultimate proof of this concept in American history. Formerly enslaved people who had been brutally denied the alphabet by law threw themselves at literacy with such fierce, undeniable determination during Reconstruction that they heavily created the public school systems of the South. They created schooling that included poor white children, too. Think about that. A people forbidden to learn essentially built the schoolhouse for everyone. They were given absolutely nothing, yet they figured out theology, law, astronomy, and ultimately, freedom. Since no system or gatekeeper out there can ever legislate away the breath of true understanding, I want to leave you with this final provocative thought. What are you actually doing with the teaching you receive? Are you just passively absorbing it, or are you actively laboring to test it, question it, and figure it out for yourself? The teaching might be theirs, but the understanding? That has to be yours. Work it until it unfolds. Thanks so much for joining me for this explainer, and keep unfolding your mind.